Hello and welcome back to my world of stuff. My name is Paul Mount and it's time for part 2 of my hopefully fairly comprehensive look at Timeslip, the legendary classic and hugely memorable 26-part children's science fiction serial that ran across 1970 into 1971. I'm actually recording this introduction a few days after the uploading of the first part of the feature. As I think I mentioned in the hastily recorded bit at the end, I decided to split the video in half because it was running to pretty much an hour, and I think that might have tried anybody's patience to extremes. So I decided to split it and post the first half, and the second half is coming up after the credits. But before I roll that particular part of the video, I just want to thank all of you who watched part 1. The time of recording, it's coming up to 2,100 people have looked at the part 1 video, and this just proves to me that there is a huge appetite for people finding out about and discovering new classic old cult TV. And I know that is one of the strengths of this channel. People do like watching the videos that remind them of shows that they'd forgotten, sometimes inform them about shows they didn't know existed. And I find it thrilling when I get messages from people saying, I've never heard of this series, but I've tracked it down. I've just bought a copy of it on DVD. And that's great because new people are going to find classic shows. My only fear is that they'll watch it and think, oh, it's a load of old toot. What was he talking about? But I think that Timeslip transcends that. I think that Timeslip, with a lot of these shows, if you can set aside issues about production values and so on, and the fact that a lot of these things are in black and white, and Timeslip is unfortunately in black and white for various reasons, you will enjoy a good story. And ultimately with all these things, that's what it's about. You can have the most incredible production values in the world. You can spend billions of dollars on making a film or a TV series, but if the story's crap, you're not getting anywhere with it. So I hope that you enjoyed part 1 of the video and that you will enjoy part 2. However, before I move on again, just want to mention 2 things that I don't think I did mention in the original video. One of the things I think that particularly attracted people to Timeslip was the incredible opening title sequence and the title music. Now, the title sequence was very simple when you look at it for what it is. It's a row of 3D yellow blocks printing out the word Timeslip with an overhead moving light casting shadows on the words so that it appears to move and becomes 3D. And of course, it's backed by an incredible piece of music, which is in fact a piece of library music. There was no original incidental music composed for Timeslip. The title theme itself is an extract from La Right de Terre, The Right of Earth, which was composed by Edward Sally Michael, a Manchester-born composer who was born in 1921. And I think I'd always assumed it was a piece of classical music going back to the 18th or 19th century. So I was quite surprised to discover only recently that the person who created this music was born in the early part of the 20th century. And in fact, when I put the video together, I used it over my title sequence, but was quickly rapped on my knuckles by the copyright gods who said, you can't use that. So I had to replace it with my usual title sequence, which was a shame because it's a really stirring, striking piece of music. And when you are familiar with it and when you hear it and see it on the Timeslip soundtrack, you can't imagine a better piece of music that sort of sums up the series. And it's one of the odd things about the music, again, a memory from my youth, hearing that music with its strident da-da-da-da-da. When I was watching it as a kid, that was time slips on again, time slips on again. Purely by coincidence, the music fits that bit of lyric which I put into my own head. An embarrassing moment from my youth that I'm not ashamed to share with you here. And the final thing I wanted to mention, of course, is, again, I don't think it made the edit. I know I mentioned it, but it got cut out in the edit. The incredible, haunting sound of the time barrier, that eerie electronic, I'm not going to call it radiophonic because it wasn't a radiophonic workshop thing, but that discordant shimmering sound that signified the time barrier when Liz and Simon approached it. That again is something, again, I noticed in the comments a lot of people mentioned that and said that was something that sort of scared them and unnerved them because it suggested this weird phenomenon that was going to happen in the series. So those are 3 little things I particularly wanted to mention about Timeslip that I don't think are in the edit version because of when I record the videos, I do chop and change and edit bits and things, and sometimes things disappear. So I just wanted to particularly mention those facets of the show. And also, Also, for those of you who haven't seen the series and are tempted to give it a go, I believe that the first 6 episodes, The Wrong End of Time, are now back on the ITVX hub. They were there for some time when it was BritBox ITVX and it disappeared. They had a specific science fiction section, lots of old shows, and Timeslip was one of them. And I understand those first 6 episodes are back there now. So if you are intrigued by it and you're not sure you want to shell out for the expensive DVD box set, or you don't want to watch slightly dodgy quality copies on YouTube, check it out and see if you're caught in the web of the first 6 episodes. Right, now what I have to do, my own bit of time travelling, I have to whip back a week to when I recorded the original video for this series. So what I need really, is a time barrier. It sounds like there might be one around here if I can find it. Is it here? I can feel something. I can feel, yeah, there's something, there's a gap. Yes. See you in a minute. The next serial is an 8-part story called The Year of the Burnup. This sees Liz and Simon in a 1990 where England has become a tropical wilderness. It's a global warming story. The Earth's temperature has risen due to man's technological advances and parts of the world have been wiped out. It's mentioned at one stage, I think, that Liverpool is underwater and humanity is struggling to survive in this barren, parched, jungle-like dystopia. Liz again meets a future version of herself, Beth, again played by Mary Preston. She's now more hippie, a sort of a free-thinking, freewheeling sculptress who lives in this little commune out in the middle of nowhere. In the city nearby, we meet a future version of Simon. He's called 2957. He's played by David Graham of Gary Anderson voice acting talent and, of course, appearances and things like Doctor Who over the years. And again, this is very well done because the technocrats in the city are a very different breed. They're the ones who are really controlling the temperature on the Earth and situation on Earth. And they are quite cold and clinical, a bit like Devereaux. They're sort of focused on what they're doing and the future that they're creating for the world. And there's some great conflict between Simon, who recognises himself in 2957, and it's played very well between Spencer Banks and David Graham. They sort of mirror each other, and David Graham is clearly trying to play a future version of Simon based on Spencer Banks' performance. I have to say that The Year of the Burnup is a story that does drag a little bit. It is 8 episodes. Because the show was mostly filmed in studio, there's only one, I think, episode that has some location filming. It does drag its heels a little bit. It does seem a little bit padded. It does get a bit repetitive. The setting, whilst it's very well realised in studio, gets a bit stifling and oppressive because we're there or we're in the city with the technocrats. By now, of course, the series was heading towards its climax, heading towards its last 6 episodes. Bruce Stewart, who had been writing the series, he was starting to feel a bit burnt out. He'd come up with the scripts, the storylines, the ideas, he'd fleshed everything out. And by the time of the last episode of The Year of the Burnup, he felt that he didn't really have any more to give the series. He was also involved in the writing of the show's paperback adaptation, which I'll talk about shortly. So a new writer was drafted in, and Ruth Boswell contacted Victor Pemberton, quite a well-known and acclaimed scriptwriter, probably most famous to most of us as the scriptwriter for the classic missing Doctor Who story Fury from the Deep, although that's just one of his many credits. He was abroad as an actor with his partner David Spencer. They were mounting a stage play at the time, and he was intrigued by Timeslip and the concepts of the series, and he was given the very difficult task of wrapping the series up across 7 final episodes. He speed read the first 18 scripts and realised what a mammoth task he had, because by now the series had moved in so many different ways and introduced so many different concepts, different avenues for the characters. It all had to be brought to a close in a satisfying way, in ways that were never imagined when the series began with The Wrong End of Time, with this fairly straightforward tale of two children travelling to 1940. Characters had been introduced. Different versions of those characters had been introduced. The concepts of cloning and global warming and science running rampant had been introduced. And this all had to be brought together in this final 6-part story that was directed by David Foster and Ron Francis. Victor Pemberton wrote it all, and he looked back at all the threads that had been established, and he pulled them all together brilliantly in a very different 6-part story, which introduced a government department called R1, which was a secret government department which was looking into cloning and longevity, all the concepts the show had dabbled with earlier on. And without spoiling it too much, issues about who certain characters actually are and who can you trust, who can't you trust. It sort of jumps back and forth between 1964 and 1969. Devereaux, who in the original series died in 1969, we meet him again. There's a lot going on in these final episodes to work to tie everything together. And amazingly, it does. It brings the whole series to a very impressive, cerebral ending in the 26th episode, when we discover the truth about Commander Traynor after all this time, and Liz and Simon pay a final visit to the time barrier. I can't remember how I felt about the series when it finally ended, because it had been running for so long. And my memories are very specific of watching The Wrong End of Time and thinking, I love this time travel stuff, this is fantastic. That specific memory of the end of episode 6, feeling slightly jaded by the third story, and then this sensation that it was rushing to its conclusion. But by the end, it was quite a different series to the one that had started 6 months earlier, because it had gone to places that had never been anticipated when they started making it as a 6-part serial, and it had grown organically and built and developed. But it always kept this through line of believability in these main characters, and whatever happened and wherever they went, there was a realism to them, which was helped by these incredibly grounded performances, not just from these new young actors who held their own against these experienced faces across the series, but everybody in the cast. And you do feel, even watching it now, that this is a show that was made with an absolute passion and a devotion and a dedication and a determination to create a proper science fiction serial that wasn't about monsters and spaceships. Much as we love Doctor Who for all the stuff that it does, the wild places it goes, this wasn't like Doctor Who. This wasn't ITV's answer to Doctor Who, because it was so different. Yes, it was about time travel, but there were no aliens, there were no monsters. It was about science and the themes of how people can grow and become different people and learn from experiences and all these scientific things that were in it. It's incredibly deep and incredibly challenging, I think. And I think that people watching it today will be astounded that it was dealing and making every day these concepts that only in the last few years have come to be on people's lips. Now we're worried about global warming. Back then, apart from the scientific community, people weren't aware of it. Who knew what a clone was in 1970? Computers, supercomputers, artificial intelligence, life-extending drugs, science going to places it shouldn't. These are all the themes that Timeslip was dealing with back in 1970 and 1971. It's quite extraordinary. Timeslip ran for just one 26-part series. There were some vague discussions about a possible second series, but I think that everybody involved, perhaps apart from the actors, felt that the show had explored everything it could, and there was really nowhere else it could go. There were some ideas bandied around, but nothing ever came of them, and the show had this 26-part life. There were some issues, unfortunately, to do with the production, which meant that as far as ATV were concerned, whilst it had been a successful show domestically, there were issues in relation to the second half of the series in terms of its production, which meant that it was difficult to sell overseas. There was an ITV production strike. I think that the technicians working at ITV were a bit concerned that they weren't getting paid more for working with the new colour TV equipment which was coming in at the time. They were just being paid the same rate as they were making shows in black and white. And this caused a number of problems with the recording of Timeslip. I think there were a couple of episodes later in the run that were recorded in black and white. And once you get a mix of black and white and colour, it's difficult to sell a show to overseas networks. There were a lot of networks across the world that still showed series in black and white, but it was difficult to sell to America, which had been in colour for years. They wouldn't be interested in the show which had some black and white content. So the show was never as commercially successful as ITV might have anticipated it being, despite the fact that it was a huge success in the UK. So plans for a second series, such as they were, faded away fairly quickly, and Cast and crew moved on to other projects. Spencer Banks moved on to a series called Tightrope, which was a 13-part espionage thriller written by Timeslip's latter writer Victor Pemberton. And that's quite a fun, it's slightly dense, Cold War sort of paranoid thriller series. Cheryl Burfield's career really didn't come to anything, unfortunately. I think she's mentioned in the past that at the time she was with an actor's agent who didn't have great contacts and he wasn't able to put her forward for other projects, so her acting career stalled. Spencer Banks carried on acting for many years. He appeared in lots of TV productions. Tightrope, Penda's Fen, a very well regarded BBC One, Play for Today type production, and lots of other shows, but even for him work sort of dried up in the late 1980s and he forged a career in other directions. In terms of the show's after image, it had an afterlife, shall we say. There was some merchandise released for the series. One of the first things off the blocks was this paperback book. This isn't my original version. This is one I've picked up since, but I bought this the day it came out. This was released in December 1970 and was an adaptation of The Wrong End of Time and The Time of the Icebox. The interesting thing about this book being released in December, it was released before The Time of the Icebox had finished on television. So if you read it, and I'm sure I did, you knew how that ended before you'd seen the TV episodes. This is how quick things were made back in the day. This is a series that was still being made when it started transmitting. Episodes were recorded a few weeks in advance. This book was being written as the series was being made. It has an interesting writer's credit from the successful television series written by Bruce Stewart and based on an original format by J&R Boswell and produced by ATV Network. It was actually written, I think Bruce Stewart wrote the first couple of chapters or maybe the first half of the book, and then James Boswell, who was Ruth Boswell's husband at the time, passed away not long afterwards from cancer, unfortunately. He wrote the bulk of the second book. It is fairly straightforward retread of the first two stories. Tragically, there was never another Timeslip book to wrap up the series. You sort of think they would have done the other two serials as a paperback. Never happened. This was reissued the following year by Pan's new children's imprint, Piccolo Books. It had the same cover, but a red background. The only other notable piece of Timeslip merchandise, I suppose, was from Look-In, the Junior TV Times, which launched in January 1971. They had picked up on Timeslip, which had been screening since September, obtained the rights to do a comic strip, which ran for a better part of 2 years, finished in December 1972, long after Timeslip had vanished from the screen, because Timeslip had been so popular, and the comic strip is extremely well remembered, certainly for its initial installments, which were drawn beautifully by the incredibly talented comic artist Mike Noble, who brought a real sense of movement and drama and action to the scripts. I have the first issue of Look-In somewhere. Do you think I can find it now? No, I looked for it everywhere yesterday. I've kept that since 1971. I now can't get my hands on it. But I have located a couple of other issues. I've got numbers 5 and 6 here. And this will give you a much better idea of what the Look-In comic strip looked like and the beautiful artwork. And you will notice that the stories are slightly different to the stories on TV's Timeslip, because obviously comic strips have an unlimited storytelling potential. They can go into all sorts of places, and here it is. They certainly widened out the concept of Timeslip. This is from issue number 5. In the first issue, the comic strip starts off with Liz and Simon crawling through the time barrier and finding themselves what appears to be prehistoric times. There are dinosaurs roaming around. It's a primeval swamp. In the last frame, Liz puts her hand into a swamp and brings it out with a mud-covered telephone receiver in her hand. And it transpires that they've actually gone forward into the future where Earth has devolved back into prehistory. That's not the sort of thing the TV show would have done or could have done, but it also did things like this, as you'll see from issue number 5. It's beautiful artwork from Mike Noble, where Liz and Simon are battling some futuristic-looking robots who have dominated mankind. I mean, it's completely not what the show would do. And in fact, the comic strip over the next couple of years would develop in all sorts of weird ways, really changing totally the concept of what the show was, where Liz and Simon travel back into all periods in history. There are aliens, flying saucers, spaceships, and the format changed so that they could conjure up the time barrier by thinking about it, and they could travel somewhere when they were talking about something historical. It became much more fanciful, but very entertaining. Certainly those first issues of Looking, that first run of comic strips by Mike Noble, were great because Timeslip was still on the screen and it was sort of working in tandem with the series, going to different places, but telling fantastic science fiction stories. I do remember being extremely annoyed when in issue 27 of Looking in 1971, Timeslip was suddenly relegated to the black and white pages of Looking and replaced with a comic strip also drawn by Mike Noble, who moved on from Timeslip, a Follyfoot. This was a very popular weekend tea time series about horses, which was of no interest to me, and I resented Follyfoot, and I still resent Follyfoot for taking over the colour comic strip pages from Looking, which was, as I say, relegated to black and white, and although it continued to run in Looking, moved so far away from the series, and of course outlived the series. It was originally planned to run the comic strip for 6 months, but the series was so popular that readers wanted more comic strips, so Looking extended it. They tried twice to phase it out of Looking, but it was so popular that the readers wouldn't let them. But eventually it did disappear in December 1972. By the time it disappeared from the pages of Looking, it wasn't really very much like Timeslip on TV anymore, apart from having Liz and Simon in it. But it had a very good afterlife, and I have to say, I would be very keen on a collected comics anthology, a bit like those ones we've had for the Tomorrow People and UFO and so on, the Tomorrow People. Collecting all those comic strips, because even though they became nonsensical, those early ones were so well drawn and put together. It would be really nice to see them again in a proper anthology, but whether that will ever happen, probably Timeslip isn't regarded as a priority for those sorts of things. Probably doesn't have the commercial potential. Timeslip, of course, made its way onto physical media eventually. It came out on VHS tapes back in the, I'm thinking it would be the late 1980s when it was released in 4 big chunky double VHS packages. I had them all. I've long since got rid of them, unfortunately. I sort of wish I'd kept them as collector's items. And eventually it was released by Carlton on a DVD edition and then re-released years later in a definitive package by Network, who put together all the episodes and a number of special features, including a documentary which had been made a few years before, which I have on a separate disc, put together by fans of Timeslip. This is called Timeslip Behind the Barrier, which interviewed most of the cast and crew, who were all still alive at the time, with a 90-minute odd documentary about the series and footage of the cast going back to the location in a place called Goff's Oak in Boreham Wood. There was also an American DVD release, which came out in 2005. I've kept this, even though I have the much better Network version, because I love the cover. I think it's a really rich, imaginative, colourful cover. I have to say, much as I like the Network version, which shows the famous fence posts, I think I like this one. It stands out a bit better. And this has the entire series and a shortened version of the Behind the Barrier documentary, which I think was still in production at the time. So that is, in a sense, the history of Timeslip. And I think, thinking about what I've been talking about, it's been much more a production of Timeslip thing rather than the personal memory thing, which I thought it might be. But the show for me is iconic and important. It's right up there, as I said, with Doctor Who, and if somebody's to ask me my top 10 favourite shows of all time, which is something I occasionally refer to here, Timeslip will be in that list because it's important to me personally, and it is a terrific piece of television. It did come back. Big Finish, of course, got their hands on it a few years ago and regenerated it in a brief run of new audio adventures, which brought back Liz and Simon, played by Spencer and Cheryl, but brought in new characters and broadened the idea a little bit. And I think I heard part of one of them, but I'm not a big audio drama listener, and I'm never entirely sure that bringing back classic dramas in the modern day is the way to go. You can never quite recapture the magic that these shows had at the time. In terms of the cast, I mean, it is fascinating to watch that documentary that I mentioned, the Time Barrier documentary, because we're so lucky that those people were interviewed at that time, because the only cast members who are now still with us are Cheryl and Spencer and the 2 Scobie twins who appeared in the Burnup story, Teresa and Leslie. The rest of the cast, and in fact the production crew, they're all gone now. There's nobody left to talk to us about the making of Timeslip. So things like the documentary in this box set are absolutely vital. And of course, I must mention the booklet that's included with the DVD set, and I don't know if you can still get either of these, to be honest, but this is a 100-odd page booklet written by the redoubtable, extraordinary, and inexhaustible Andrew Pixley, which details the history of the series, and that's where a lot of what I've told you today comes from, because I've read this overnight. A terrific book, and which tells you everything you could ever need to know about Timeslip. The show survives. It has a fairly small but thriving fan body. Check out this address for the show's official website, which has reviews, features, interviews, all sorts of stuff about Timeslip and its legacy. Well worth a look. It's all there if you want to know more about the series, because I've just sort of cantered through it in a slightly all over the place fashion. One of my great regrets, I think, is that I didn't participate in any of those early 2000s reunions and meetups when the cast and crew would all meet informally and go for meals, and they would visit that location of the remaining fence posts in Goff's Oak in Boreham Wood. They're still there. The naval station's been long developed and demolished and replaced by a housing estate, but the Timeslip fence posts remain. They still stand there. They're still recognisable. I think you can visit them, but I think you've got to be careful. I think it's private property, but I think you can get onto them. And that is something which I would actually like to do. But then Timeslip is important. It's important to me. And I think if you can get hold of it, you can still pick up the DVDs on Amazon. But they are expensive now. Obviously, Network's no longer with us. It's not been picked up or re-released. So you will find it on secondary markets, but you're not going to pick it up cheaply. But if you have an interest in classic British fantasy genre television, particularly stuff in that golden age that was aimed at children, Timeslip is an absolute must-watch. If you've seen it, you'll know what I mean. You'll know why it is so highly regarded by those who saw it at the time. And I just wish that we lived in a country with a television infrastructure that still made children's programs of this caliber, this intelligence, that treated its audience like adults, thinking people, and not numbskulls, which I think a lot of kids' TV today seems to be. So that's Timeslip, one of my favourite TV shows. I hope I've done it justice. When I started researching it over the last couple of weeks, I wanted to get it right. I mean, there are people out there who are more expert in the series than me, and if I've got anything factually incorrect or slightly drifted from the true production narrative, I do apologise. But I wanted to put across my memories of it, plus how it was made, how it came about, and how it progressed. And I hope I've managed to do that to some degree here. A really important series to me, and I really fancy watching it all over again now. Timeslip. It's just brilliant. And I give Timeslip, I don't know if it's a fantastic idea to rate shows from the past, but I'm going to give it 10 out of 10 because of what it means to me as much as what it was. Right, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this quite long video. I'm hoping to edit it down slightly so it won't be nearly an hour long. But we're talking about 26 episodes of television. That means a lot to me, so I'm going to take my time. What the hell? If you've enjoyed this video, if you've stumbled across this channel today, why not stick around? Loads of stuff to watch. If you look at the back catalogue, loads of classic retro TV, Catweasel, Double Deckers, Survivors, Tomorrow People, Ace of Wands. Plenty more to come. Loads of stuff as this channel continues to plough its very unique retro furrow. So please stick around, like and subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below. Be really interested to hear from those of you who remember Timeslip, and from those of you who might not have heard of it and are interested by it and possibly interested enough to track it down. You will not regret it if you do so. Thank you for watching. I will see you soon. If you want one of these lovely Keep Taking the Stuff t-shirts, by the way, still available. I'll leave a link down below. You can pick one up at a very reasonable price. I will see you soon. Until I do, keep taking the stuff.